Welcome to Politics and Psychology. Thank you for joining me today. Did you know that when you vote in the presidential election that you are not actually voting for a president? When you vote, you are actually voting to show your popular opinion of who you want to be president, but you're not actually directly choosing the president. Instead, your vote is used to then tell your state's political designated voters on who you want them to vote for. And that's very different from the heavy political messaging and campaigning for getting out the vote and the please vote for me campaign messages that we are being bombarded with on our text messages, social media, and through the mailers in the actual post office. But how does this happen that we're getting so much pressure to cast a vote when it's actually a few individuals in our state and in our country who make the deciding vote? And does that mean that you should not even take the time to vote? Well, in short, yes, you should vote, but you also need to understand how the Electoral College will use your vote. Our country's founding fathers established the Electoral College in the Constitution mostly as a compromise between the election of the president by a vote in Congress versus an election of the president by a popular vote of citizens. And the reason for the compromise was that many of the founding fathers believed that Congress should be the individuals that pick the president, and the other half believed that the president should be picked by the popular vote of the people. The leaders who believed it should be Congress who picked the president is because they also believed that the general public was not educated enough to appoint a leader of our country. So the compromise of the Electoral College was so that the electors would be the middleman where Congress did not appoint the president, but neither did the American people. However, when deciding how to calculate the number of electors that each state would receive, the main debate then became about, well, what about the states that have mostly enslaved individuals as a majority of their population? And since we don't really count slaves as humans and we don't allow slaves to vote, then they should not be given equal say in our Electoral College number. This is for those who were voting for it to be by Congress. But then there were another half of individuals who were slave owners who believed that, well, yes, I do own slaves, but I do want that to be counted toward my population because technically they are in my state and therefore I should be able to get the same number of electors. So in some states where the enslaved person counted for the majority of the population, they didn't want that. And so those who didn't want to lose the benefit of those slaved body counts, conflict of, well, we can't say that they are not equal, but then give them an equal vote. Then there came the decision to have a 3/5 compromise where only 3/5 of the enslaved Black population would be counted toward allocating representatives and electors to that state, as well as being calculated for federal taxes. So that's the core of why the Electoral College was birthed. And this compromise of the Electoral College was then included in the Constitution. And although the Electoral College is part of the original design of our Constitution, the term Electoral College does not appear in the Constitution. And despite its name, the Electoral College is a process and not an actual college and not a group of people or voters. It's a process, and the process consists of two parts. In the first part of the process, each state, including yours and Washington, D.C., each state will select a specific number of individuals and designate them as electors, electors, electors. These individuals are usually people involved in political activities or a leader in the government office, or they have a long history of political involvement. For example, it might be the chief right now in your state's Department of Agriculture, or it might be a director of urban housing in your local mayor's office. It might also be the chairperson of your state's Republican Party or the chairperson of the Democrat Party. However, the electors cannot be in political office. They can just be politically involved. So therefore, you won't have a U.S. senator or a U.S. representative. Anyone who is currently in Congress is not allowed to be chosen as an elector. And it also cannot be a local elected official such as the mayor or your local senator or local representatives. The number of electors in each state will depend upon that state's number of congressional senators and number of congressional representatives. Each state is given a number of electoral votes that is equal to the number of senators and representatives, with 2 votes for each U.S. senator, plus additional electoral votes that will equal the number of congressional districts for that state. And through the 23rd Amendment of the Constitution, the District of Columbia has been allocated 3 electors, and for the purposes of the Electoral College, they are regarded as a state. And now, through the abolishment of slavery, as well as civil rights acts, both African Americans, formerly enslaved, and women are considered whole individuals and not 3/5 of an individual. In the United States Constitution and in most states, there are no specific rules for the method of how that state will select its electors. Each state, including Washington, D.C., will have its political parties, meaning usually the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. Each party will select their own electors, and they may select one person residing in each of their congressional districts and maybe additional individuals to serve at large. But again, each process will go according to each different state, and then within each state, each political party will have its own rules for its selection process. For example, one party may elect to have individuals as candidates and then give their recommendations to the governor, and then the governor will then make the final approval or may replace a recommended candidate with another individual of his or her choice. And this is the process in Florida, for example. But in other states, like in Michigan, the political parties make the decision themselves and they choose the presidential electors at a state political convention. They will then certify the names of their electors to the Secretary of the state, where it is then sent to the governor, who is required to issue a certificate that lists the appointment of the specific electors by name and includes the state seal. In Michigan, political parties send their decision list to the Secretary of the state, who then sends it to the governor. But like we mentioned with Florida and other states, there are many different states who do it in different ways, and where many may send it to their state board of election, some may send it to their Secretary of State, where it's a group being decided for the certification rather than a person or a position. And if you are interested in learning how your state selects its electors, I included a link in the description of this episode, but you can also just go look on your own State Board of Election website for the selection process of the presidential electors. So in all states, the first part of the process is controlled by the political parties in that state, but the selection process will vary from state to state. And it's also at this first part of the process where the designated electors are not official presidential electors. They're more considered like official candidates for being a presidential elector, but they are not the official ones just yet. They only become official during the second part of the process, and this is where your vote comes in and how you are involved. The second part of the process happens during the general election. This is in November or during early voting period in your state. So when you and other voters in your state cast your vote for president, who you are really voting for is for the designated presidential electors and not the actual president. You are voting, and if your presidential candidate for whom you voted wins and wins the most votes in your state, then you are also voting for the selection of the designated unofficial presidential electors in your state to then become official and to therefore vote on your behalf for the presidential candidate. This means that if you vote for a Republican presidential candidate and that candidate wins the most votes in your state, then the designated electors selected by your state's Republican Party will then become the official presidential electors for your state. And as the official electors, they will then vote for the Republican presidential candidate. It also means that the designated voters selected by your state's Democrat Party will not become official. And because there will not be any official Democrat electors, there will also be no Democrat voting presidential electors. If the Republican wins a popular vote, then it's the Republican electors who then become official and will then vote according to the Republican Party's desires. And the same would be true if the presidential candidate who won the most votes in your state was the Democrat nominee. In that case, then only the electors who were chosen by the Democrat Party would then become official, and those who were on the losing party or the opposite party, the opponents, the Republicans, would then not have anyone to vote for their preferred Republican candidate. So it's only by the winning presidential candidate that we then determine who the electors are and who become official presidential electors for that state. And the only exception is Nebraska and Maine, and for them, they appoint electors to more than one presidential candidate for their distribution of it. So when you vote in November and you vote for the president, this is where the popular vote matters. If the presidential nominee who wins the most votes in your state is the Democrat official nominee for president, then that means it is the Democrat presidential candidate who won the popular vote. The same would be true again if it were for the Republican nominee who won the most votes for president. It would then be the Republican nominee who would have won the popular vote. Once we identify who has won the popular vote for president, the electors then become known. So they're not known until the results of the presidential general election are finalized. And most citizens, because of this, don't know who their official electors are until after the election. But in some states, the potential electors' names may appear on the actual presidential ballot right below the name of the presidential candidate. It will just depend on the election procedures and the ballot formats for that particular state. And if you want to know who your state's past electors are, I have also included a link in the description of this episode for the 2020 election. And we won't know the 2024 electors in your state or in any state until after the 2024 elections have been finalized through the popular vote. So again, it's only after the announcement of the presidential winner of your state's popular vote that the unofficial presidential electors for the winning presidential candidate become official. And this all happens in November. Then, on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, the official presidential electors will then cast their vote for President of the United States. And when they are casting this vote as an elector, they are not voting as a citizen, but as a representative of your vote and of your state's presidential popular vote. So it's the electors who in our country are the only citizens in our country who actually vote for the president. And this is done in December at their meeting called the Meeting of the Electors, and it will happen in the state in which they reside. Now, although the electors were chosen by the respective political party, it is not a guarantee that an elector will actually vote along party lines. And this is why some states require selected presidential electors to give or to sign an oath with their state's political party before the governor even finalizes their unofficial appointment. But even with the oath, there still is no guarantee that the now official appointed presidential elector will actually vote according to the party lines or even according to their oath. And this is because there is no constitutional provision or any federal law that requires an elector to vote according to the results of the popular vote of their state. And the United States Supreme Court has held that because the Constitution does not require for electors to be free to vote as they choose, that because the Constitution does not say that they have to be free, that it therefore can imply the opposite, meaning that if we're not saying that you have to be free, well, then political parties can say that you have a requirement to vote according to how we want you to vote. And in addition to that, in 2020, the Supreme Court then decided that, well, now the states can create requirements for how their official electors must vote, and even how they can set legal fines or other punitive action against the electors who do not vote according to their oaths or according to their party line. And for the states that do have voting requirements for their electors, they are also required to take an oath or make a pledge, and these pledges will fall into two categories. So one will be electors who are bound by state law, meaning what did the state's Board of Elections decide on not only what was the election and selection process for the electors, but also how are they required to vote. That would be the state law. Some states don't have a state law requiring the voting behavior of electors to be in a certain way, but they may have promises and pledges to their political party upon which they are required to keep. And for those states that do have those requirements, the electors who do not vote according to the popular vote, who do not keep their political party promises or do not abide by the state laws for how the electors should vote, then again, they may be fined or disqualified. And if they're disqualified as the elector, then their vote becomes disqualified and they are replaced by a substitute elector. In general, however, it is rare for electors to disregard the popular vote and to then cast their electoral vote for president for someone who is other than their political party's candidate. And throughout our country's history, more than 99% of electors have indeed voted as they pledged or promised or as they were required to by their state law. But let's go back to the night of the general election. So once the popular vote for the President of the United States is known, then your state's executive will prepare a certificate of ascertainment that will list the names of the individuals who have been now officially designated as a presidential elector for that state's winning presidential candidate. Then in December that same year, the meeting of the electors is held, and the electors will cast their votes for president and vice president, and they do this on two separate ballots. During the meeting, the state's electors' votes are recorded on a certificate of vote, and it's that certificate of vote that is then sent to Congress, where the votes are counted and become part of the official records of the presidential election. The electoral votes are counted on January 6th during a joint session of Congress. And during this joint session, members of the House and the Senate meet in the House chamber to conduct the official count of the electoral votes. The current Vice President of the United States will preside over the count and will be the person who announces the results of the vote. The Vice President then declares, based off the results of that vote, who has been elected as the next President and Vice President of the United States. Later that month, the President-elect will take the oath of office and be sworn in as the President of the United States on January 20th. So what is the purpose of having an electoral college if the individuals who become the official electors are still going to vote according to the popular vote? And if they're going to vote for the popular vote and also their party's political preference, then what really is the point? And because there have also been 5 times in our country where the presidential candidates who won the popular vote ended up losing the Electoral College, this is why many individuals are asking, well, what's the actual fairness or even the necessity of having an Electoral College? And this is why over the past 200 years, more than 700 proposals have been introduced in Congress to either reform, meaning to change, or to eliminate the Electoral College. In fact, it's more proposals for constitutional amendments on changing the Electoral College than any other subject in our country's history. But despite having over 700 proposals to eliminate or change this Electoral College, why isn't it happening? Well, one reason is because the party during the time of the election who is already in power, they typically benefit from the existence of the Electoral College. And the minority party will have a very small chance of changing the system because of a constitutional amendment that requires a 2/3 majority of Congress plus ratification by 3/4 of the states. So if you have one political party who maintains all the power, they are not going to vote to change an amendment or to change the Constitution for the Electoral College because it's benefiting them, it's benefiting their political party directly. If you have individuals within that party who are individually benefiting from staying in power, then they are also going to vote against it. So it's not so much that individuals who then make it to Congress then become true advocates for America or what's best for America or even what's best for the original intention of the Constitution. It then becomes what's the best for the political party or for my individual political or financial gains when I'm in office or when I leave office. So the reason why it keeps going back and forth is because political power keeps changing in who has the lead in the Senate or who has the majority in the Senate or the majority in the House. And so because of that, it's going to be very hard for individuals who are not dedicated to authentically caring for the constituents to actually make a change that benefits anyone other than themselves or the political party. So then when you cast your vote for Congress, please consider, well, what are their past behaviors? Do they show me that they are committed to the public or are they committed to a political party? Are they showing me that they're more committed to their individual gain from their political power if I vote them in? Or are they going to use their political power for the benefit of my community and for my state? So understand that Congress can change a lot that can have long-term legacy-like implications for our country if they voted according to what was best for the country. But not everyone does that, so then be mindful of for whom you cast your vote for Congress. Also remember that your parties within your state, if you have for example, I'm in Maryland, if you have the Maryland Democrat Party, if you are in Arkansas, then the Arkansas Republican Party, those parties in your local level are the ones who will then decide who are the electors, and they will usually select individuals who will benefit the goals of that state level political party. And so when you are not just voting for president, not just voting for senators at the congressional level, not just voting for governor, also be mindful of who is running for a leadership position in your local political party and how their own individual needs for power or their desires for political change will impact who they elect as an elector, and therefore who will then be the deciding factor for how you cast your vote for a popular vote, and if that will then go all the way to the top like you want it to be. So when hearing about the process of the Electoral College, you might ask yourself, well, then why should I even vote in the general election, and does my vote even count? Well, yes, it does count, because with your vote, it can then reflect to your state's political party, who the popular vote resides with. And if you stay home and you still have a preferred candidate, but you don't vote, then the individuals who did vote, their popular vote will then decide which individuals are selected for your state's official electors, and they will then proceed to then cast their vote for the opposing political party. So your vote does matter, and until we can have individuals in Congress who are truly focusing on the good of the country rather than party, and who are focusing on collective gain rather than individual gain for political power, then we are stuck with the Electoral College process. So until that changes, use it to your benefit. Use your vote to increase the number of individuals in the popular vote who will then be leaning more towards your desired candidate. Well, I thank you for listening. It's almost election time. If you are stressed about elections, I've been pretty busy providing commentary for the mental health and the psychological impact of election anxiety and political stress. And we are including those not only on my Instagram page, which is at Dr. Renee Carr, also in the description of this episode, but also on the podcast social media accounts for Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And then you can see some of the clips of me on the news or at a press conference or something. But you can at least see me there if you want to see what I look like. But other than that, remember to go and vote. Have a plan for voting. Remember that not only do you matter, but your vote matters. And I personally care about your life. So I want you to vote in ways that are meaningful for you and for your family and community. So do what's best for you, for whomever you vote. And until next week, that ends our time for today. But please continue this conversation and educate others about the Electoral College and what that means and how that will then provide meaning for how they vote for congressional leaders. And whenever you have the conversation about politics, what we talked about today, the Electoral College and getting people out to vote, even who the presidential candidates are. Whenever you have these conversations, remember that we can achieve more through using objective facts, which is why I emphasize science, but also with embracing the humanity, which is why I emphasize love. So please continue this conversation using science and love. Walk the path of life. And if you run